Great. So thank you for the introduction. Yeah, obviously I'm Dan Whittaker, and I've been asked to sort of talk here for Hack Motion on how I use this on a daily basis on what I do within my coaching. So to give you guys an idea on what I do. So the agenda for me here is going to be that I'm going to talk to you about what I do, about my journey within golf coaching. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my coaching identity, my philosophy, what coaching systems I use, and then when we go into a live case study, look at how I use that on a day-to-day perspective in a lesson, and then actually how that would then formulate a plan going forwards for a player. So about me, so I started playing golf age 13, relatively late compared to some other people, but sort of got the golfing bug, and then got half reasonable. So I was off like +1 on the old handicap system, which is probably like a +3 on the worldwide one now at the age of 17. At that point, I'd taken no formal golf instruction whatsoever. And then age 19, turned pro, started to have some lessons around there. And then it was around that time, just became confused about what I actually really wanted out of golf, because I didn't really enjoy the assistant type of playing in tournaments. The courses weren't really the ones that we used to play in as amateurs. So I ended up deciding to start doing some running whilst I was doing my degree through Birmingham University. And this sort of opened me up to lots of other avenues within other sports, because I ended up getting quite reasonable as a track and field athlete at 800 and 1500 meters. I ran for England, so ran at a national level. Some of my friends were the doctors and the physios of the national teams who did a lot of runs with. So this sort of enabled me to start to figure out a lot about the body, a bit of biomechanics, things quite early on, and just I started to sort of get me quite fascinated in those areas. Then I quickly after that got a club pro role, which only lasted a couple of years. Realized that running a shop and what have you wasn't for me, but I did actually start to do a lot of coaching at that point. Build my own teaching studio, which was pretty modern at the time. We had 2 digital video cameras linked up to a laptop. It was positively futuristic. And then from there moved on to coaching, developed, and then had my own coaching academy, had people who worked for me, and then developed this at this point, which is when back around 2010 started to do some YouTube work. Back then I was involved in golf forums, talking all geeky golf chat and things like this. And there's a guy who had a thing called the Gotham Golf blog, and he'd ask people to give videos or be able to present information. And at this point, I started to do some videos. And it was then as well, he asked me if I'd do some online lessons for someone, which of course I said yes. This video lesson took about 2 hours to produce for a 10-minute video, which obviously you can now do today from your phone. But now, back then, YouTube wasn't a paid platform. It was just a place to sort of show your voice, show your opinions, show what you liked on the swing. And still today, it's quite a good platform for me. I've got like 49,000 subscribers on there, and I use that just to now and again bring videos out and talk about topics within golf instruction that I think are pertinent to where I'm currently at. I'm now an ambassador for Under Armour, and I'm got the only Under Armour performance centre in the UK. I do sort of footwork for those guys. I help them with working with JJ Rivet over at the ETPI in Terreblanche in France. And together we'll collaborate, and he'll do the design of the shoe. I'll look at the functionality. I'll then see what performance gains it's giving to a player. And then from there, I'll produce the reports that are given out to the golf media and what the story is on the top of the range shoe. So it's quite a cool little thing. Also do some video work for Titleist. So if you were ever on the Titleist website and bored enough to have a look on the instructors page, you click on there and you see my ugly mug on there as one of the people who will give some content and exclusive videos done for Titleist. I've now coach a lot of developing players, so a lot of really talented juniors and amateurs who had wins at every level within the amateur game. And particularly within my country anyway, and some national championships, a couple of international wins. I've had wins at Europro, and on the Ladies Rose Series, and we've got players this year on the Challenge Tour and the Ladies European Tour and the LET Access. So I've got quite a nice group of players in different areas. And currently I'm doing some work with Hugh Moore on his CMAS program, which is really about developing your coaching, and just really been fascinating stuff to help just develop what you do on a day-to-day basis. So that's currently where I'm up to. Now, what we've got is here we're talking about my coaching philosophy. So my coaching philosophy is that it's all got to be data driven and proven. So for me, I'm very much evidence-based as a coach. So stats is a part that leads a lot of this for me. So I will be looking heavily at where a player's game is from a statistical perspective, looking at the low-hanging fruit there so that I can start to look at what are going to be the easy wins. And then I have teams of different types of coaches who I work with. So I have Mark Bulfer, who's got a phenomenal background in biomechanics. He helps me out a lot. I have some great physical trainers. And then obviously it comes on to me with the coaching. So I'm looking at how I can bring from statistics, from biomechanics, from the physical, from the screening, from what they're going to do in the gym, what is the body capable of, and where does it need work to end up gaining in performance. So I'm relating all of those together from a coaching perspective, but always aligning it to what the students' goals are. So using that SMART goal setting analogy really is a key part of what I do, because I've got to make sure that this is absolutely in line with what the student in front of me is wanting to do, is capable of doing, and has the time to actually make these sort of goals a reality. Now, I have this model here, which is the stages of coaching that I go through, and this is in every single lesson. And let's give you like a brief overview of how I see each of these areas fitting together and being vital in the coaching environment. So for me, the first bit obviously is going to be the analysis bit, but this actually is very multifaceted, because it comes from pre-lesson, where I'll gather as much information on a player as I can. So it will be having a look at statistics, asking the player where they're at. I'll be getting information on whether they've been injured, what's happening within their own game, and really starting to get as much info before I see them. Then in person, I'll be analysing how a person stands to make sure that, do they lean on one foot or another? Is there something within their posture that could relate to the swing? There's a lot of things that carry over from everyday life into the swing. And I use a lot of emotional intelligence questioning early on, so I can really get on the wavelength of the student to allow me to communicate with them. Because communication, as a wise man said to me, is not what is said, it is what is received. So this is a really important part of that part when we're starting to be able to look at what a player's able to do, and us being able to communicate well as coaches. For me, then in the analysis part, very data heavy, and I look at all of the data and how that can pull together. Then obviously going into the diagnosis part, I really try to look at what are going to be the easy wins to start with. Is there something I can do pre-swing that will affect the in-swing principles, that will effectively alter the dynamics, which are the players' movement, but also the ball flight that we're going to see. So I really do pay a lot of attention to the pre-swing, and I'll only change one at a time, because I want to know, is the change I'm making having the desired effect? And therefore, I can then start to add on to that one at a time throughout the session, the ones that I need. This will then be part of the coaching part, where I will introduce that one bit in. So the one bit that I've diagnosed that I need in that coaching. And then the review part is I'm analysing what that change had and then going back again. So it's just a nice cycle that I'd go through. Now, the analysis part for me is, as I said before, gathering information. So I have all of it before a session, and then in a session, I've got a lot of technology in my studio, and I'm looking at ball flight, I'm looking at what's happening through the ground, I'm having a look at how this reactive interrelates to the wrist, and then using video cameras from a 3-way camera system. I've also got a 3D system as and when I need it. So I'm really trying to connect the dots between what the pupils told me, okay? So what is their intent and all the other bits that come into a golf shot. So, what are they trying to do? And then versus what is actually happening in the ball flight, how this then relates to the body movement, and then how can I help tell this to the student through a video, because they've seen themselves on video so often, and this is a big part of what I do. So for me, this is how that's all starts to take shape. So obviously, to start with is intent and the concept. So what is the player trying to do, and what is their concept of what they're actually trying to do something that they're capable of, or is it even the correct thing that they should be trying to do? Then we're linking this back to then what they're physically capable of doing, and then linking the physical back to environment. So is the type of golf course they grew up playing having an influence on what we actually see right now in the ball flight that they produce? Then from there, we're having a look at, is this in line with equipment, and making sure that all of these bits that we see on the screen here fit together. Having a look at from the performance through to the ball flight, how the club's moving, and then the body movement and how this all fits. And then for me, what the next bit is, which is going to be the easy win to get the student better. So this diagnosis part, looking at the player, and the center to it is impact, because obviously we know that's the moment of truth. And I link it all then back to the body and how their body moves, how it functions, okay? And then looking at the wins that I've got on the outer circles here to relate back to the center. So is it a grip issue? So, or is the grip in a good spot, but actually they've got their arms in the wrong spot because their shoulders are in the wrong place relative to their rib cage? And this is then influencing the movement that we see. Is it that they've got a width of stance that's just not allowing them to be able to pivot correctly because they're correct sway, but they're actually just too narrow? So it's how do all of these sections relate? And then on the right-hand side are the sliding scales that I look at for each individual part. You look at this as spectrums. So from a pivot perspective, a center pivot, right pivot, left pivot, which one suits the individual the most? And then relating it back, always back to the shot the student has told me that they either want to get rid of or that they would like to see ball flight wise. So it's always back to what their goals are. Now, hat motion, how do I use hat motion, and what do I essentially do with it? So for me, hat motion is just a great tool because it obviously lets me see the wrist data movement in the 3 directions, but it's always relating them back to the interaction between the player and the ground, their intent, their concept, and the ball flight, and then trying to relate it back to them individually on how they are predisposed to move, what they are capable of doing from a movement perspective, and what limitations they may or may not have. This bit is vital to me. So it's understanding how it all relates, and therefore then building this pattern around the individual human I've got in front of me to help make them the best player I can make them. And it's always about the individual in front of me. So we're talking here on a little case study. So we've got here on the screen Simon Dyson, who won 6 times on the European Tour, 9 times around the world. So Dyson and I are good friends, but I also coach him, and he came to see me after he'd had wrist surgery. Now, we can see here on that left-hand image, and if we go back one more, that lead wrist is heavily flexing through impact. So that flexing movement through impact was something that he probably made him the great player he was. You know, gave him exceptional control of the ball flight. It allowed him to really be phenomenal at knockdown shots. But when we actually saw him playing and winning, he actually won on really tight golf courses in normally quite relatively windy conditions on links type courses, and did that movement that he had, which gave him a lower flight, gave him plenty of run with driver. But would that have stacked up to play in the bigger courses in America where it's needed to get that height on the ball? Potentially not. Okay. And this is where I would go back there, is in today's world, I don't know whether Dyson would have had the wrist injuries that we've seen him experience, but we don't have the ability to wind the clock back. But what we see is that left knee is exceptionally flexed at impact. So he's down in the shot, he's not elevating out through the left side. Left wrist continued to move into flexion through the golf ball. And this put this wrist under exceptional levels of pressure through the golf ball, which unfortunately ended up leading into an injury. So I'll just play this video here, and we can see there that there's a tendon, and we can see it just popping on the outer part of the wrist bone. And this is when he went in for surgery, and we can see the way that tendon is moving. Okay, so he obviously tore the subsheath on the ECU tendon. So what happens is that the subsheath sits on top of the tendon, and it sits inside a groove, crudely speaking, in the wrist. And the way that Dice moved through the golf ball with that wrist movement, what happened is it would just go under exceptional loads of stress through the ball. And these exceptional loads of stress through the golf ball were just over a repetitive long period of time meant that the subsheath effectively just tore. So what we saw there was the tendon on the outside, and the subsheath healed underneath it. So he had to go in, and that had to get repaired for him. So his delivery of the golf club 100% contributed to that injury. So how do I use my coaching process to work through this is where I'm going to now go to. Is that, first of all, if we have a look at the hack motion data on the left-hand side, this was his pre-surgery golf swing, his old golf swing, if you like. He could still intrinsically do this, but he never felt like he had the power with it afterwards, just because the way that it healed, it never truly felt the same to him. But the interesting part for us was just to have that conversation, that analysis at the beginning. You know, how did he originally play? Played up in Yorkshire, windy golf courses, played amateur golf in the UK, links golf courses, exceptionally good at it, great Walker Cup record, great record playing for England, undefeated. So amazing at those types of golf courses. Again, amazing when he turned pro. What was happening though is that movement, as we can see in the graph, when you have a look at the green line, which we know is the flexion extension line, we can see that line is going down into flexion through the golf ball, quickly coming back out the other side. But I would have the guess that it would go into flexion for even longer when he was at his prime. So the analysis part was, number one, was just having a discussion and listening to how Dice saw the world from a golf perspective. What did he like to do? How did he like to flight the golf ball? What was his coaching history? All the things that came together. So therefore, then what we could do is start to put together a plan. So I'd got hold of footage from him when he was winning. So that was a footage from when he played at Valderrama, and he ended up spinning the ball off the green on 18, just missed getting in the playoff by one, the year that Rose won it. And that was him swinging at his best, and we could see the exceptional amounts of flexion through that wrist. So I explained to him how this and the knee working together was putting so much pressure on him. He'd already started to experiment with thicker grips, as you can see that he's got on his clubs right here in this video, taken in March 22. This is at in Turkey. And you can see here, he's still got a lot of shaft lean, but this is real low levels of shaft lean for Dice compared to what he did have. So we explained how we've got to get that lead side to elevate from the ground up through the shoulder, which allows the left arm to get longer and effectively put the left wrist into greater levels of extension through the ball, which will then give him the ability to hit the ball higher, which I always felt was something that he needed with his driver. Intriguingly now, though, even on certain shots around the greens, if he wants to hit a low runner, he'll always turn the wrist down, but doesn't have any idea that's what he's doing. That's just how he plays that shot. But because there's not a high level of load going through that, he can really keep doing that for those particular types of shots. It was more a case of how do we relate this to the long game to help optimize performance for him. So when we then layered those changes in, we started to look firstly on that he played with an exceptionally narrow stance. So a really narrow stance was encourage that leg drive coming through for him, made it really easy for him to stay in the shot. So first change was let's alter setup and see what we get. We altered that around. Now he's playing those jumbo max grips because he felt like that helped take pressure off the wrist. I never felt it did, to be honest, but even that video, the graph on the left is with the jumbo max. I had a feeling it'd be way worse with a thinner grip. Then what we started to do then was have a look at where he would be at address to make sure that the shoulders were in position to fit with the way that he wanted to hold the golf club. So set up positions. Then it was all about in-swing changes. So we did a couple of drills, and those drills were these two here. And the first one is me explaining to Dice how I wanted the wrist to extend. So he simply grabbed hold of it and then started making practice swings. And he just started to talk fluidly about, it feels like the bounce is working. I'm delivering more loft. This is how the club is working. Mm-hmm. And we can see here that he ended up developing this into hitting shots with it. And he became really good at it. So this became part of his warm-up. It gave him the feeling of what he was trying to do, how he would use the ground. And then what we did with the right hand video is that we got him with a left foot forward, right foot back. And the reason for doing this is it gave him the ability to use the ground and extend. So having that ability to A, feel how the wrist moved, and then B, be able to feel that left leg extending. He's got the left side longer. We can see that left leg extends a lot quicker, and he finishes a lot taller. So these two drills became huge ones in his sort of development as a player, or getting him back to altering what he did and taking all of that pressure off the wrist. Because for me, him being the way that he related the movement of the wrist to produce the ball flight was the big thing. So actually, when you go back to the original part, it was intent. He played a lot of golf courses that were short and in the wind. So environment influenced the way he moved. So we have to look back through history to see what happened. Obviously, I looked at some of the footage as well to relate how this all worked, and then put this into an improvement plan that he sampled Tour School last year after only a really short window of practice to get ready for it. Just didn't quite get through, but he's going to have a full season playing this year, and I guess we'll see where he gets to. But hopefully you've enjoyed that and heard a few bits about how I would go around it from a coaching process perspective. If you have any questions, please fire away.